David Chen is human botanist working at the Thessari Imperial Botanical Gardens, extensive research facility attached to the Royal Palace complex, encompassing hundreds of acres of cultivated gardens, experimental agricultural plots, research greenhouses, and laboratory facilities where scientists from multiple alliance species study plant biology, crop development, and ecological systems. David accepted temporary research assignment at the gardens through Alliance Scientific Exchange Program. His expertise is in cross-species agricultural compatibility, studying how crop varieties developed by one species might be adapted for cultivation in environments suited to other species. Research that has practical importance for Alliance food security and for supporting colonies where local agriculture hasn't yet been fully established. He's been at the Thessari Gardens for 4 months, working primarily on project examining how human grain varieties might be modified for Thessari soil chemistry and climate conditions. The work is technical and absorbing, analyzing soil compositions, testing various genetic modifications, documenting growth patterns under different environmental variables. His daily routine rarely brings him into contact with palace officials or court personnel. The botanical gardens operate with significant autonomy. The research conducted there is valuable to the empire, but it's scientific work rather than political activity, existing in sphere somewhat separate from the ceremonial and governmental functions that occupy most of the palace complex. David's world is contained within the research facilities, the greenhouses where experimental crops are cultivated under controlled conditions, the laboratories where genetic analysis occurs, the outdoor garden sections where field trials are conducted. He collaborates with Thessari botanists and with researchers from other alliance species, attends scientific seminars, produces research reports. He's aware that the gardens are technically part of the Royal Palace complex. The facility was established centuries ago as Royal Patronage Project and remains under palace administration. But in practical terms, the connection feels distant. He works in scientific environment, not in political one. The elaborate hierarchies and protocols governing court life don't extend into the greenhouses where his days are spent. He knows, intellectually, that Queen Seraphina and the royal family presumably live somewhere in the vast palace structure, but he's never seen them, has no reason to encounter them. Moves in completely different spheres, research scientist working on agricultural problems, far removed from the sovereignty and statecraft occurring in other parts of the complex. This separation has allowed David to work comfortably without concerning himself with court politics or royal protocols. He's just scientist doing his research, interacting primarily with other scientists, living the kind of focused professional life that academic researchers prefer. But over the past few weeks, his routine has developed pleasant addition, regular visits from young Thessari child who has become interested in his work. She first appeared about 3 weeks ago while David was working in one of the outdoor garden sections, conducting soil analysis for plot where he was testing modified wheat varieties. She watched him work with evident curiosity, then began asking questions about what he was doing and why. David answered her questions patiently. He has younger siblings back on Earth, generally enjoys children's unfiltered curiosity about the world, appreciates how their questions often force him to explain complex concepts in clearer ways. The child returned several times over subsequent weeks, always friendly and curious, always interested in what David was working on. She introduced herself as Lyra but never offered any additional identifying information. No family name, no mention of what her parents did, no context that would have suggested she was anything other than child who had access to the gardens and who enjoyed learning about plants. David assumed she was daughter of one of the palace staff or perhaps of one of the other researchers. The gardens are a large facility with many personnel, and it seemed reasonable that some of them would have children who occasionally visited the grounds. Lyra proved to be bright and genuinely curious. Her questions showed she was actually processing the information David provided rather than just asking random things. She wanted to know about soil chemistry, about why certain plants grew better in some conditions than others, about genetic modification, and how scientists could change plants to make them more suitable for different environments. David found himself enjoying these interactions. Lyra's questions made him think about his work from new perspectives. Explaining complex botanical concepts to curious child required finding clearer ways to articulate ideas that he normally discussed only with other specialists. Their conversations were informal and pleasant, David treating Lyra the way he would treat any interested child, without formality or special deference, just friendly scientists sharing knowledge with curious young person. He never questioned her identity or her access to the gardens. Never wondered why this particular child seemed to have freedom to wander the palace grounds and to spend time observing researchers at work. Never noticed anything unusual about her clothing or her bearing that might have suggested she was someone of particular status rather than just ordinary child. This afternoon follows the pattern that's developed over recent weeks. David is working in outdoor garden section, taking soil samples from plots where various experimental crops are being tested. Lyra approaches with her usual friendly curiosity, watching what he's doing for several minutes before beginning her questions. "What are you measuring today?" she asks, observing David's careful extraction of soil cores. "pH levels and mineral content," David explains while continuing his work. "Different plants need different soil conditions to grow well. I'm testing whether the soil in these plots has the right chemistry for the wheat varieties we're trying to adapt. And if it doesn't have the right chemistry," Lyra follows up, "then we either modify the soil, add nutrients or adjust acidity, or we modify the plants genetically so they can tolerate the existing conditions," David says. "Usually some combination of both approaches works best." They talk for perhaps 15 minutes about soil chemistry and plant genetics, Lyra asking thoughtful questions and David providing explanations that Lyra seems to genuinely understand and appreciate. Then Lyra delivers message that changes everything about David's understanding of his situation. "My mother asked me to tell you that she would like to see you," Lyra says with the casual tone of child, conveying simple message. "She said to ask David Chen to come to her private study this evening after the gardens close, at the 7th hour. The message is delivered cheerfully, almost casually, Lyra conveying what she was told without any sense that this is unusual request or significant summons. To her, it's just her mother asking to see someone, the way mothers do when they want to talk to their children's friends or to meet people their children have been spending time with. To David, the message triggers immediate confusion and concern. David stops his soil sampling, his attention shifting entirely from his work to processing what Lyra just said. Someone's mother wants to see him. He doesn't know any of the palace staff well enough that their family members would be summoning him to meetings. He has professional relationships with his fellow researchers, but those relationships are collegial rather than personal. He doesn't socialize with his colleagues' families or get involved in their personal lives. And why would the request specify his full name, David Chen, when Lyra has always just called him David in their conversations? That level of formality suggests something more official than casual family introduction. "Your mother?" David asks carefully, trying to understand the situation without revealing his confusion too obviously. "Yes," Lyra confirms with the patience of child explaining obvious thing to adult who's being unnecessarily dense. "She said she's been meaning to meet you for a while, since I've been telling her about the interesting plant work you do and about our conversations. She wants to talk to you about the gardens and about your research." "I see," David says, though he doesn't see it all. "And your mother works at the palace. In what capacity?" Lyra looks at him with expression that suggests she's genuinely confused about why he's asking such obvious question. "She doesn't work at the palace. She is the palace. Well, she runs it anyway." David's confusion deepens. Runs it could mean administrative position. Perhaps Lyra's mother is senior palace official responsible for facilities management or something similar. That might explain why she'd take interest in research being conducted at the gardens. So your mother is palace administrator. David tries to clarify. No, Lyra says with the slight exasperation that children show when adults keep missing obvious points. She's the queen, Queen Seraphina, that's my mother. David freezes. The soil sampling tools in his hands become suddenly irrelevant. The experimental plots around him fade from his awareness. The entire botanical garden, his comfortable professional space where he spent 4 months working without concerning himself with palace politics, recedes as the implication of Lyra's casual statement crashes through his understanding of everything. Queen Seraphina, the Thessari sovereign, the ruler of the empire, the person at the absolute apex of every hierarchy that governs the palace complex and the civilization beyond it. The monarch whose name appears on official documents and formal protocols, who is referenced in lowered voices with appropriate deference, who exists in an entirely different sphere from research botanists working in the gardens. The child he's been having casual conversations with for the past 3 weeks, the friendly, curious girl who asks questions about soil chemistry and plant genetics, who watches his work with genuine interest, who he's been treating like any interested child without formality or special protocols, is Princess Lyra, heir apparent to the Thessari throne, daughter of Queen Seraphina, and he's been completely unaware of her identity, has been treating her with friendly informality appropriate for curious child but completely inappropriate for royal heir, has been explaining botany to her without any of the formal deference or careful protocol that interactions with royalty require. David's mind races through every conversation he's had with Lyra over the past weeks, searching for moments where he might have been inappropriate or disrespectful, realizing with growing horror that his entire approach has been wrong because he didn't know who he was talking to. He called her just Lyra, never used any title, never showed the formal respect that addressing princess requires. He let her watch him work without treating it as formal observation requiring special arrangements. Just allowed her to stand there asking questions as though she was ordinary child rather than royal heir, whose presence should have triggered careful protocols. He explained complex scientific concepts to her, without considering whether it was appropriate to be educating the princess directly rather than going through proper channels and formal tutorial arrangements. Around them, the garden continues its normal rhythm. Other researchers working in adjacent sections. Gardeners tending to various plots. The ordinary activity of the botanical facility proceeding without awareness of David's sudden recognition of how drastically he's misunderstood his situation for the past 3 weeks. I didn't know, David manages to say, his voice strained and uncertain. Didn't know what? Lyra asks with genuine confusion, apparently unable to understand what information David is claiming to have lacked. Didn't know that you're the princess, David says, trying to keep his voice steady despite the shock. That your mother is Queen Seraphina. You never mentioned, I never realized. I've been treating you so casually, without any of the proper protocols or appropriate deference. That's exactly why I like talking to you. Lyra interrupts with the blunt honesty that children employ when they're stating simple truths. Everyone else at the palace treats me like I'm the princess first, and like I'm person second. They're always worried about protocols and proper forms of address, and whether they're showing enough respect to my rank. But you just treated me like I'm Lyra who's interested in plants, she continues. You explained things because I asked good questions, not because you were performing appropriate deference to royal status. You talk to me like I'm actually person you're having conversation with, not like I'm symbol you need to show proper respect toward. It was nice, Lyra says with the wistful tone of child, who doesn't often get to experience being treated as just herself rather than as her position. That's why I kept coming back. And that's why I told my mother about our conversations, because they were real conversations rather than just formal performances. David processes this, understanding now why Lyra never introduced herself with title or formal identification. She was deliberately concealing her identity, because she valued the informal treatment that concealment allowed. But that understanding doesn't reduce David's concern about the current situation. Regardless of Lyra's preferences, he's been interacting with the royal heir without proper protocols. And now the sovereign wants to see him, personally, has summoned him to her private study. But now my mother wants to meet you, Lyra says, returning to her original message with the practical focus that children show when they've delivered important information and want to ensure it's been properly understood. She said the 7th hour this evening in her private study. I can show you where it is if you don't know. David tries to gather his scattered thoughts. Lyra, Princess Lyra, I should probably go through proper channels for meeting with Queen Seraphina. Request formal audience through official protocols, rather than just showing up at her private study, because her daughter delivered casual message. She specifically said to come to her private study rather than requesting formal audience, Lyra clarifies. She said this is personal meeting rather than official business, so formal protocols aren't appropriate. She wants to meet the person I've been talking to about plants, not to conduct formal court business with research botanist who happens to have been interacting with her daughter. This explanation somehow makes David more concerned rather than less. Personal meeting with the sovereign feels even more daunting than formal audience would be. Formal audience would have clear protocols, established procedures for how to behave and what to say. Personal meeting has no such structure, just direct interaction with person who happens to hold absolute authority over the entire civilization David is currently living within. I'm not sure I'm prepared for personal meeting with Queen Seraphina, David admits honestly. I'm research scientist. I don't have experience with court interactions or with addressing royalty in informal contexts. I wouldn't know how to behave appropriately. Just behave the way you behave with me, Lyra suggests with the confident simplicity that children employ when they think solutions are obvious. Talk to her the way you talk to me, like she's person rather than like she's position. That's what she wants. But she is her position, David protests. She's the sovereign. There are appropriate ways to interact with monarchs, protocols that exist for good reasons. I can't just treat Queen Seraphina like she's ordinary person I'm having casual conversation with. Why not? Lyra asks with genuine curiosity. She's still person underneath being queen. She still has conversations and interests and opinions like any person does. The protocols just make it harder for people to interact with her as person rather than as symbol. The protocols exist to show proper respect, David tries to explain. To acknowledge the difference in status and authority between sovereign and everyone else. Ignoring those protocols isn't being authentic, It's being disrespectful. Maybe, Lyra acknowledges. But my mother specifically asked to meet you because I told her about how you treat me like person rather than like position. If she wanted formal protocol interactions, she would have requested formal audience. She asked for personal meeting because she wants the kind of honest conversation that protocols prevent. David realizes he's debating appropriate behavior with the 7-year-old princess, which itself feels like it's probably violating several protocols about how to interact with royalty. But the debate is also clarifying something important. Lyra is right that Queen Seraphina could have requested formal audience if she wanted formal interaction. The choice to summon him to personal meeting in her private study suggests she wants something different from standard protocol-governed court encounter. All right, David concedes. I'll come to the meeting, but I still think I should probably use appropriate forms of address and show basic deference even in informal context. Just treating the sovereign like ordinary person seems. She'll tell you if you're being too formal, Lyra interrupts pragmatically. She's good at communicating what she wants from conversations. Just start respectfully and adjust based on how she responds. That seems like reasonable advice. David takes breath, trying to calm his anxiety about the unexpected summons. The 7th hour, you said, in her private study. Yes, Lyra confirms. I'll come find you at the 6th hour and show you where it is. The palace is big and confusing if you don't know the layout well, and my mother's private study is in section that visitors don't normally access. Thank you, David says, though he's not entirely certain he's grateful for Lyra's assistance in navigating him toward meeting he's not prepared for. I should probably finish my work here and prepare somehow for this evening. Don't prepare too much, Lyra advises with the confidence of child, who thinks she understands situation better than the anxious adult. My mother doesn't like it when people perform practice presentations. She prefers honest conversations over rehearsed formality. Lyra departs, leaving David standing in the garden with his soil sampling tools and his completely disrupted understanding of his situation at the palace. For 4 months, he's been working comfortably in the botanical gardens, treating his position as straightforward research assignment without political complications. Now he discovers that he's been having regular informal interactions with the princess, interactions that apparently the queen has been aware of, and has been observing with enough interest that she now wants personal meeting with the human botanist who treated her daughter as curious child rather than as royal heir. David tries to return to his soil sampling, but his concentration is completely broken. His mind keeps circling back to the evening's upcoming meeting, trying to anticipate what Queen Seraphina might want to discuss, worrying about how to conduct himself appropriately in personal meeting with sovereign when he has no training or experience in such interactions. He's called by name, by full name, David Chen, indicating that Queen Seraphina knows not just that some human researcher has been talking to her daughter, but specifically who he is, what his name is, enough about him to identify him precisely rather than just as generic researcher. That level of knowledge and attention from sovereign is unsettling. David is accustomed to being anonymous, just one researcher among many at the gardens, just one human among the dozens working at various palace facilities, nobody of particular importance or interest to anyone beyond his immediate professional colleagues. But apparently he's been noticed. His interactions with Lyra have been observed or reported, and Queen Seraphina has decided that the human botanist who treats her daughter like person rather than like princess is someone she wants to meet directly. David spends the rest of the afternoon working mechanically through his remaining tasks while his mind remains focused on the upcoming meeting. At the 6th hour, as promised, Lyra appears to guide him to her mother's private study. Ready? She asks cheerfully. Not remotely, David admits honestly. But I suppose that's not going to change between now and the 7th hour, so we might as well proceed. Lyra leads him through the palace complex, navigating corridors that David has never accessed before. The gardens where he works connect to the palace's public and administrative sections, but Lyra is taking him into private areas, residential wings where the royal family actually lives rather than where they conduct official business. The architecture changes as they move deeper into these private sections, less formal, more comfortable, designed for living rather than for ceremonial display. Guards are positioned at various checkpoints, but they step aside when they see Lyra, allowing her and her guests to pass without challenge. Finally, they reach door that Lyra identifies as her mother's private study. She should be waiting for you. Just knock and enter when she responds. I'll head back to my own quarters now. You're not staying? David asks, feeling somewhat abandoned. This is meeting between you and my mother, Lyra says. I'm just the messenger who delivered the invitation. What you talk about is between the two of you. She departs before David can protest, leaving him standing alone in the corridor facing the door to Queen Seraphina's private study. David takes breath, trying to settle his nerves. Knocks on the door with more confidence than he actually feels. Enter, comes clear voice from within. David opens the door and steps into the study. The room is smaller and more intimate than he expected, not vast throne room or formal audience chamber, but actual working study with bookshelves, desk, comfortable seating, arranged for conversation rather than for ceremonial positioning. Queen Seraphina sits in one of the comfortable chairs, wearing informal but clearly high-quality clothing rather than ceremonial regalia. She looks up as David enters, her expression showing calm assessment rather than the stern formality he'd been half expecting. Dr. David Chen, she greets him, using his full name and confirming that she does indeed know exactly who he is. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Please sit. I've been wanting to meet the human botanist who has been having such interesting conversations with my daughter. David sits in the indicated chair, trying to maintain appropriate composure despite his nervousness. Your Majesty, I must apologize for my interactions with Princess Lyra. I had no idea who she was. She never introduced herself with title or formal identification. I've been treating her far too casually, without any of the proper protocols or deference that her position requires. Yes, I'm aware, Seraphina says with slight smile. Lyra mentioned that you didn't know her identity. That was deliberate choice on her part. She concealed who she was because she wanted to be treated as just Lyra rather than as the princess. And apparently, you provided exactly the kind of informal, genuine interaction she was seeking. But that doesn't excuse my failure to recognize, David begins. Dr. Chen, Seraphina interrupts gently but firmly. I didn't summon you here to criticize your interactions with my daughter or to reprimand you for protocol violations. Quite the opposite. I asked you to come because I wanted to meet the person who has been treating Lyra as curious child interested in plants rather than as royal heir requiring careful management. She pauses, then continues. Lyra has been telling me about your conversations for the past 3 weeks, about how you explain complex botanical concepts in ways she can understand, about how you answer her questions without condescension or performative deference, about how you treat her intellectual curiosity as genuine, rather than as something to be indulged because of her status. She values those interactions immensely, Seraphina says, because they're rare for her. Most people at the palace, most people anywhere, treat Lyra primarily as the princess. They're always aware of her position, always careful about protocols, always performing appropriate respect rather than just engaging with her as person. You didn't know who she was, so you just treated her the way you'd treat any bright, curious child, Seraphina continues. And that gave Lyra something she desperately needs and rarely gets. Interactions where she's valued for herself rather than for her position. I appreciate that Your Majesty isn't upset about the informal interactions, David says carefully. But I'm still not entirely certain why you wanted to meet me personally, rather than just allowing the interactions to continue as they were. Several reasons, Seraphina responds. First, I wanted to assess you directly. My daughter has formed attachment to you based on your conversations. As her mother, I wanted to meet the person she's been spending time with and form my own judgment about whether your positive influence worthy of continued access to her. Second, I wanted to thank you personally for providing something valuable to Lyra, she continues. The kind of genuine interaction you've been offering isn't something that formal protocols or official arrangements can create. It happens organically, or it doesn't happen at all. You've given my daughter gift of being treated as person rather than as position, and I'm grateful for that. Third, Seraphina says, I wanted you to know that I'm aware of your interactions with Lyra and that I approve of them continuing. Now that you know who she is, you might be tempted to treat her differently, to introduce formal protocols and appropriate deference that would destroy exactly what makes the interactions valuable. I wanted to explicitly tell you not to do that. David processes this. You're asking me to continue treating the princess casually, without formal protocols, even though I now know her identity. I'm asking you to continue treating Lyra the way you've been treating her, Seraphina clarifies, as intelligent, curious child who asks good questions about plants. The lack of formal protocol isn't the goal. It's just the condition that allows the genuine interaction. If you can maintain that genuine engagement while being aware of who she is, that's what I want you to do. But Your Majesty, that seems, David struggles to articulate his concern. Inappropriate, disrespectful. I understand that Lyra values being treated as just herself, but surely there are still appropriate boundaries and proper ways of interacting with the heir to the throne. There are, Seraphina acknowledges. But those boundaries and proper interactions already dominate 95% of Lyra's life. She's surrounded by people showing appropriate deference, maintaining proper protocols, treating her as the princess she is and will become. What she needs, what every child needs but what is particularly rare for royal heirs, is some small space where she can just be a curious person learning about the world. You've been providing that space, Seraphina says, and I'm asking you to continue providing it, now with full awareness of who Lyra is, and with my explicit approval as her mother and as her sovereign. David takes breath, trying to formulate response. I'm honored by your trust, Your Majesty. But I have to be honest, knowing that Lyra is the princess will probably affect how I interact with her even if I try to maintain the same casual approach. It's difficult to unknow something once you know it. I understand that, Seraphina says. I'm not expecting you to pretend you don't know who she is. I'm just asking you to let that knowledge inform your interactions rather than dominate them. Treat her as Lyra, who is also the princess, rather than as the princess who happens to be named Lyra. I'll try, David commits, though I should warn you that I might be awkward about it for a while as I adjust to the knowledge. Lyra will help you adjust, Seraphina says with slight smile. She's quite good at managing adults who become too formal around her. She'll let you know if you're being unnecessarily deferential. The conversation continues for another 30 minutes, Seraphina asking about David's research, expressing genuine interest in the agricultural adaptation work, discussing her own interest in the botanical gardens, and their role in supporting Thessari food security and scientific advancement. As the meeting concludes, Seraphina says, "You were called by name, Dr. Chen, by full name. That wasn't casual choice. It was deliberate communication that I know who you are, that I've been paying attention to your interactions with my daughter, that you matter enough to be noticed by sovereign who typically operates far above the level of individual research scientists. Being called by name by someone who should not know you exist forces recognition," she continues. "Forces you to confront connection you didn't realize was being formed. For 3 weeks, you thought you were just having pleasant conversations with curious child. Now you know those conversations were observed by child's mother who happens to be most powerful person in empire, who chose to learn your name and to summon you personally. That's unsettling realization, Seraphina acknowledges. But it's also invitation. Invitation to recognize that the casual interactions you thought were insignificant actually matter. To Lyra, to me, potentially to how my heir develops, and how she learns to balance being position with being person. So continue the conversations, she concludes. Continue treating Lyra as curious child who asks good questions about plants, and know that in doing so, you're providing something valuable that formal court arrangements could never create, and that